Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to our webinar on critical minerals, hosted in partnership with the Investing in African Mining Endowment. Today's panel of speakers will discuss unlocking Africa's critical minerals through global demand and local development. Our webinar today is sponsored by Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, MTN Business, the Council for Geoscience, the Industrial Development Corporation, Stratus, and South African Airways. We thank them for their support in making this event possible. Before we start, please note that we've activated the Q&A function for your questions. Please direct any questions to the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. While we may not get to every question during our time together, we will review each one. Additionally, the chat feature is enabled for your comments and insights. Look for it right next to the Q&A box. Remember, though, questions should go into the Q&A to ensure that they're properly addressed in that section. Please be informed that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you afterwards. Also, we're broadcasting live on YouTube and the link will be shared in the chat once it becomes accessible. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Laura Nicholson, the Head of Content and Strategic Partnerships at Hive Group's Investing in African Mining Endowment. Laura is a seasoned mining content creation professional with 20 years of experience in the mining and industrial sectors. She'll facilitate the discussion with our panel members, who include Nzila Mtenjani, the CEO of Minerals Council South Africa, Sudipto Moitra, GM of ICT Solutions at MTN Business, Mosa Mabuza, the CEO of Council for Geoscience, Khashani Mohale, Senior Specialist in the Industry Planning Units at the Industrial Development Corporation, and Adam Matthews, Chief Responsible Investment Officer of the Church of England Pensions Board. And without further ado, I'll hand over now to our facilitator to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and a big thank you to Mining Weekly for the opportunity to talk about a subject that is so incredibly relevant at present. So much so that at Mining Endowment, we've dedicated an entire day of discussions to it. So please consider this the start of a strong conversation that is going to carry us through to February next year and well beyond that as well. There is a lot of areas to cover when considering how best to unlock Africa's critical minerals potential, and by extension of that, ensuring Africa finds the perfect balance between supplying global demand, but also holding back on some of its mineral wealth to develop its local downstream potential. Never before has the mining industry needed to be so connected across the value chain as it does now. I'm fortunate to have a strong panel that covers all the key areas so important to this discussion, from exploration and finance and investment to legal frameworks and technology. So with that said, let me start this conversation, and there is no better place to start than at the beginning with exploration. Moza, Africa can only truly take advantage of the global demand for critical minerals if we develop these assets, but a lot of exploration is required to reach this end point, and a lot more than this is currently needed, and it really needs to happen a lot more. Moza, what do we as a continent do to rapidly increase exploration of these minerals across the continent?
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the fellow panelists. And like you, I really like to join you in thanking Mining Weekly for organizing us this important topic. You're quite correct. It all starts with the understanding of the rocks. And we generally talk about Africa's mineral endowment. And I really want to start it at the beginning, just giving a perspective of how much more we still have to know and uncover in respect of what Africa has and what critical role Africa will play into the future. If you take the past couple of decades and you compare the investments of developed economies in geosciences relative to the average in the African continent, you will have an appreciation that the developed economy has invested on average $65 per square kilometer in geosciences in country. And on average, and of course there are huge variations in the African continent, but on average in the African continent, we have yet spent an average of $5 per square kilometer. Now that begins to delineate the potential, the true potential, the gap first, and the true potential that lies ahead. And I would argue that we can leverage already from the fairly insignificant investment in geosciences of $5 that already puts Africa at the top quartile of the supplier of choice of minerals. And I would urge that we would need to put mechanisms to close that gap so that Africa invests in geosciences and has the knowledge of what minerals it has and how those minerals would ultimately fit into the integrated value chains. I think that a deliberate African-wide approach through such structures as the Organization of African Geological Surveys that puts together the geological surveys of all African nations. So as the heads of geological surveys, we look at these matters and we sit on an annual basis so that we can have conversations in these platforms so that you know about our existence and how we can find collaboration to go and invest in this very important aspect, the beginning of it all, which is the knowledge of your geosciences. And it is only once you know your geosciences that you truly have an appreciation of what potential you have and how then do you achieve modalities, legal licensing, and otherwise fiscal instruments and financing that will achieve that truly integrated value chain proposition that benefits both the African continent and those who will be consuming the minerals. I will pause there for now. Thank you very much.
Mosa, thank you, and great context to start the conversation. And really, as you say, that geology and understanding what's there is critical and key to unlocking our future mineral potential. Now, I think it's a perfect segue, Moses' comment, to go on to Kashani from IDC. Now, Kashani, you, as the IDC, have really stepped up to support Africa from an exploration point of view, and you've launched an exploration fund in partnership with the DMPR. Can you share the current status of this fund and what the next steps will be as part of the objective to increase exploration activity?
Yeah, just thanks very much for having us. First off, the Council for Geosciences is also a partner in this exploration fund, so we need some technical expertise as well. So it's not just about the money. Yeah, so maybe in building on what Musa said, the South Africa's ore body is well developed by continental standards, but that exploration has been eroded over the last couple of decades or so. So we needed to really step it up again, and particularly since there's a new bouquet of minerals that are, the flavor of, well, hopefully more than a month. And also we need to do it in an inclusive way. So that's why we're targeting the junior miners. There are criteria. I don't know if I need to go into that here, but I assume everybody who is interested has probably been, looking at the details of that and maybe attending the clarification meetings, etc. But yeah, we've had quite a lot of interest. The first tranche was 160 million rand out of the 400 total allocation. Yes, it is grant funding, but in a sense recoverable. So should the project be successful, then we will negotiate on a case-by-case the terms for co-ownership. So we've had over 100 applications, and unfortunately, well, it's not so bad, but more than half of them were not qualifying, sometimes incomplete or targeting the wrong minerals or the minerals that are not prescribed for this round, and some entities that do not qualify as junior miners. But all in all, we've had a good interest, and I think I've been asked not to mention time frames, but the team is very close to finalizing the first round of the technical evaluations. And I must say, I'm very glad to say that the 160 million rand is not the limit, it's not the cap. It pretty much matches the quality of applications and what we think deserves to be supported going forward. So yeah, it's looking good and exciting. We expect maybe the future rounds may be different. Depends on the outcome of this one. But yeah, that's where we are.
Still a phenomenal project to be undertaking and really supporting increased exploration in the country. So really admirable and great to have such close partners like the Council for Geoscience working with the IDC on this. And we can't wait to see some of the fruits, some of the results of what you're undertaking there, Kashani. So thank you very much for sharing that insight with us. I think the next step is to move to Mzila, who really represents our mining industry and is the voice of the mining industry. And naturally, the regulation, the policy has a huge role to play in how we develop our critical minerals. Mzila, what policy frameworks do you believe will assist African countries secure economic development linked to the mining of critical minerals?
Yeah. No, thanks, Laura, for that question. And I think it's a great question to be exploring, no pun intended, at this point in time in terms of the scramble for Africa. And how I've thought about it, not only from a South African perspective, but I think as your question asked from a continental perspective, for me, it really needs to start with positioning the mining industry as one of perhaps 2 or 3 key industries that could be a catalyst for economic development for the country and therefore for the continent. And I think with that clarity in terms of what mining can and should do for the economy should then be supported with everything else and every other decision that is made after that. And so when it comes to mining policy, and in fact, looking at how the conversation has started with Musa starting from an understanding of the geology, and then with the enablement from financing, it's then when an explorer then comes, it should be made as easy as possible for that individual, he or her, to be able to explore and start to mine. And so, policies from the ease of access to information that will allow for quick decision as to whether you're interested or not in exploring in that country. Once you've made the decision and you're going through with the exploration application, I think the ease with which you go through that process of applying for an exploration license with supporting permitting such as, water, user license, environmental management, but understanding that the exploration is still a very high risk initial step for mining. And so that needs to be as quickly as possible in terms of feedback and response from the authorities in terms of policies. There should not be too much burden in terms of what is expected of you to deliver, be it economically or socially. And I think there should be limited, but I think clear guidelines in terms of environmental responsibility whilst you are exploring. And then when you then move on to mining, where you're really beginning to get close to the money, that's where I suppose you'll have a much better capacity to be able to withstand more regulatory requirements. So I think clarity of policy overall from an economic perspective, such that it supports even clearer policy around how mining can develop much quicker and much better than we've seen certainly in our own country, so that it shouldn't take any longer than 4 to 6 months, worst case 12 months, to get your mining license, but it shouldn't take more than 3 months, for instance, to get your prospecting license. And so the overall policy environment, in my view, should be supportive of mining as a key driver of economic growth at a time when the country and the continent is actually in need of significant amount of investment that will then help catalyze a lot of other industries and a lot of other social developments.
Thanks, Mzila. I like your reference to catalyzing other industries. I think we are finding ourselves in a time where the mining industry has a much larger role to play.
Yeah,
in what other
exactly.
industries have to do, and we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit more during this webinar. I also like your reference to timeframes. I think it's a great place to start to commit to time points that we feel that we can achieve, and that's how we're going to get success. And I don't think anything that you've shared is new, but it's absolutely on point of what we have to get right in order to unlock our mineral potential across Africa. So really insightful information shared with us, Mzila. Thank you so much. From this point, I think to get that global international perspective becomes really important to the conversation. And Adam, this is where I'd like to bring you in. The Church of England Pensions Board is a global mining investor, but you have a really key focus on ESG delivery from the mining industry. Adam, do you feel that the race for critical minerals on the African continent could see industry compromising on ESG commitments? And what would your recommendations be in this regard?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for the question and also for the invitation. Excited to be beginning the path to the Indaba in February. So looking forward to it because I think this is going to be a really important one. So great to be part of the panel. Look, I think if we're going to see the minerals provided in a way that genuinely benefits local communities and economies differently, you're going to need institutional investors alongside other investors, governments, demand-side countries to be really leaning into the industry in a way that perhaps we haven't done in the past, to be able to ensure that it can be a form of mining that does leave that legacy of positive benefit, and that there's the infrastructure to go alongside it, particularly in the more sort of greenfield developments that are going to be needed. And a lot of that capital and investment will be coming potentially from organizations that are going to have expectations around environmental, social performance, and ensuring that there aren't those negative impacts, and that this is done well. And I've just served on the UN Secretary General's advisory panel on critical energy transition minerals as the finance representative. And that has tried to set out a set of principles to really guide the way that mineral-rich countries can seek to develop those minerals in a way that is equitable, is fair, benefits communities, benefits those countries, and isn't simply about extracting and shipping out a country and value being added elsewhere. And at the same time, making sure that sort of the finance sector plays its part in really sort of being willing to walk with the sector, recognizing it's difficult, and really recognizing that it's going to take a lot of effort to be able to deliver the kind of growth in the sector that's needed, but at the same time wanting to see those minerals coming from mines that are operating to those best practice standards, and really ensuring that the rest of the market is also aligning behind that, so that there's an incentive, there's a reward, that we're actually standing behind those companies that are seeking to do it the right way. Because at the moment, if we're being totally honest, it is harder to do it the right way than it is to do it in a way that doesn't take account of those externalities that sometimes may require greater upfront investment, etc. And so there's a real question from the investor community about how do we do it differently now going forward, recognizing that there's going to be a need for 300 new mines to meet global demand for the energy transition. And if we're going to do that, how are we going to play our role in ensuring that the rest of the sort of financial ecosystem is aligning to expecting those standards and investing in that way, and ensuring that the money's going into the right places for that to occur. And so that really was part of the objective of the work of the UN Secretary General's panel. Equally, it's the focus of the Global Investor Commission on Mining 2030, which has taken a long, hard look at the role that investors can play here, and the way that we can ensure that we build the partnerships to work with industry, to work with government, to work with other stakeholders in really unlocking the minerals that are needed. I would reiterate the importance that previous panelists have spoken of, ensuring that we've also got the investments in the geology, and that we know where we can extract from, but also that we've got the stability in the regulatory environment for companies to be able to operate in. And so my sense is that a lot of this is going to be developed through partnerships at the national level, but getting very practical and actually focused in on where the minerals are, where they can be extracted, where there can be expansion of existing sites, the infrastructure that's needed, and then the kind of partnerships to put together to put the finance in place to unlock it. And I believe that you'll find the long-term enduring capital that will really ensure that we can do it differently will be from the investor community that are looking to those ESG standards. So I do think it will be very important, and sort of working with that is going to be a key element of how we can meet that future demand.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for really highlighting the community aspects when we talk about ESG, because I think it's becoming increasingly important that we consider our communities as a very important stakeholder within our mining world. Certainly Mining Indaba is going to do that for the first time in 2025. So really glad that you've pointed that out, as well as a few other crucial areas such as infrastructure, which we're definitely going to touch on as well. And just coming back to the key importance of geology and knowing where those minerals are. So I know Mos is going to be very busy as we move forward in ensuring that our industry does know that. Mos is smiling. I think we've come almost full circle in terms of our conversation, but there's one crucial element that we haven't touched on. Sudipto, I'm going to connect to you at this point and reference the importance of technology. We can't talk about any aspect of the mining industry without talking about the important role that technology has to play. So Sudipto, taking your field, MTN's field of expertise into consideration, how important is the role of technology when ensuring Africa has a prosperous critical minerals producing future?
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Laura, for that question. I think, the role of technology, I think we don't have to debate, the importance of it, but I think it's more about the practicalization of the implementation of technology. But before we look at the role of technology, I think in this space, what we're seeing, mining as an industry, the business area where there is a lot of modernization that's happening, or even looking at the legacy environment from technology, aspects like planning and scheduling, optimization, the fleet management and health, areas like operator assist, or even things like variable for field maintenance and operator safety, the role of sensors and the real-time data, or whether it's also around the planning and scheduling, to all the way to the extent of things like the collision avoidance and vehicle intervention, which is becoming a gadgeted law in across the Africa. So there are very profound sort of business areas, all the way from survey and monitoring, planning, safety, operations, where technology is playing a critical role. And further to that, we also have done a recent survey, and just to share with the individuals that have joined the webinar, what we're also seeing is in that survey that we did across this critical resources space, the implementation of technology, even the modern technologies like 4IR, etc., is becoming very profound. Things like, smart video surveillance, the analytics on CCTV, things like, remote infrastructure, asset monitoring, and all the way to, the operations of machines with drone cameras for surveillance inspections are becoming a reality. So the role of technology in all of this is quite profound. And what we are seeing is the convergence of the information technology and the convergence of the operational technology in this industry is becoming more and more real. Across the 17 markets that as MTN we operate, we're constantly seeing whether it's an existing organization that is looking, wherever they're in the value chain from the exploration all the way downstream, they are trying to bring the modern technology. But at some point, I suppose the important consideration becomes practicalizing it. And that's where I think the actual implementation of technology, whether you bring it down to something like connectivity, which is the bedrock of all technologies, and making sure that the enablement layer of the technology is there, is where we see the market kind of progressing, and that gives the opportunity across the value chain for us to go into the next level, as we look in terms of investment in this very critical sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sidipto, and quite right. No surprises on the technology front, but very important that we bring that into any conversation we have with regards to sort of unlocking Africa's critical minerals, as you say. So really valuable input coming from. Thank you very much. I think we've touched on geology so many times. I think each of my panelists has referenced it in some form, and I think I just want to circle back to that. Mosa, when you think about South Africa, we are a mature mining country, and we have a lot to share in terms of successes or lessons learned when it comes to motivating for exploration, even though that might not be our strength at present. Won't you share with our audience what key areas would you highlight with regards to successes or lessons learned from a South African context that the rest of Africa could perhaps take a sleeve out of your notebook and apply to their own minerals?
Oh, yeah. I think if there's a very important lesson, particularly for us as the geological community, is that our forebearers did a fantastic job of delineating mineral systems, and we were blessed with very huge mineral systems, like the Wits goldfields has been mined for 140 plus years, and we have the Bushveld igneous complex that we are still characterizing, but almost more than 2/3 of PGMs arise from that mineralizing system. You can take the manganese fields, again, more than 2/3 of manganese sources come from those manganese fields. And so our forebearers did a fantastic job over the years of consistently investing in geology to a certain point. I think that nations must never cease to invest in research. There must be continuous research which will allow for some level of serendipitous discoveries to happen. We are seeing that we have a solid foundation on which we are now able to extrapolate with it's not easy, but it's a reasonable ease when we move into this new suite of the new group of minerals that are creating a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, called critical minerals. We have not fully mapped those back to the geology. And so what we are now doing is to say that when the world makes commitment to transition, for example, to net zero by depending on who you talk to, 2050, 2060, and so on and so forth, it matters not to us. We would look at what does that mean for the mineral inputs that will sustain that transition, and how do you then map that back into basic geology? And I'm finding that in the African continent in particular, we are blessed with such wonderful geology that we must never take our eyes off the curve. of the ball as nations, and that our countries must be more disciplined to continuously invest in the geology, so that this mapping back to the geology and saying, if you are interested in mineral X, this is where the geology for mineral X would be. And you just have to go and do very little to corroborate that indeed the mineral is there, and the rest of the value chain. The Minerals Council and its members would be very happy. The policymakers would make informed choices about uh, what is the mining policy that will be best for the country, which will not be based purely on anything else, but it will be informed primarily by the evidence before. And that evidence, when you attract investment and you want to have conversation with the Church of England, it is much easier when I approach Adam and say, how much cobalt do you want? And this is where the cobalt is located, and Mzila's members have the capacity to mine, and so on and so forth. So I must say, Laura, that I'm particularly excited that I see that African leaders and leaders in society in general and platforms like these are beginning to have an appreciation of the importance of exploration and, by extension, geology, because you will not have exploration unless you have deliberately invested in geology and embraced disruptive technologies. And I agree that we need to embrace disruptive technology that will enable us to see the things that our forebears couldn't see, that some of those mineralizing systems are now at far greater depths, but there's technology to be able to assess the subsurface and delineate those minerals, so that when we do make choices about modalities of development and the extent to which we imbue integrated value chains, transformation, community development, and shared value principles as they obtained in the ESG, for example, all of those are informed by choice. That is something that makes me very happy. And I would love to see the rest of the continent. And I must say that increasingly I see African countries, our sister and brother African countries, investing heavily in geology. Just the other day, Zambia took a decision to have a national air coverage, geophysics airborne coverage of a particular type, spending I think in excess of $100 million for acquisition of that data. And I can go on about other nations that are investing in geology. It starts there, because once you have taken a decision like that as a country, then the rest follows. I think sometimes we are very quick to say we want investments, we want beneficiation, we want this, but you can't want those things unless you know what you have. Once you know what you have, then you can decide who should be your partners and how you should partner and how you should create that value. Thank you very much.
Laura, can I just ask a question? Sorry to do this. I know that we've also formed, but I mean, to what extent do you feel there's opportunity in the tailings waste of and the legacy waste of mining? Because I've been visiting a number of sites, particularly in South Africa, and there's not only what was originally mined there, I'm seeing companies discovering other things that were not accounted for in the original mine. And I just sort of feel that there's not only the subsurface, there's that opportunity to really look at the legacy sites, find where there's opportunities for extraction, and then being able to sort of at the same time address some of the legacy issues of that waste and storing that then safely and subsequently in accordance with the global industry standard.
Can I respond, Laura?
Yes, of course, Isa.
Okay, I couldn't agree more with you, Adam. I think that the opportunities of legacy mines cannot be overstated from several prisms. The first one is that the technology that was used at the time was not as efficient with extraction of minerals as it has become now. So we have much greater and much better technological advancement in respect of this recovery and reclamation from those legacy mines. But also, we know, just one example, that there are such things as rare earth elements that obtain in much greater concentrations in the coal fields. And so if you go into the coal discards and you visit what would ordinarily have been a nuisance and an environmental nuisance, degradation of land, risks of spontaneous combustion, and so on. Now you can have a huge reclamation program which enhances the quality of the land, it enhances the environmental degradation that would have arisen from historical mines, and you could recover such new minerals that were not a subject of recovery previously as rare earth elements, together with others in other minerals that are dumped. So your point is absolutely correct. That yes, there are opportunities in multiple ways. There are those that are possibly deep, but there are those that are shallow, but were not a subject of focus from historical exploration and so on. And then there are those that would arise from reclamation and so on. So I couldn't support your point more. Thank you very much.
Zila, I see your hand is up, so I'll give you the floor to comment as well.
Yes, thanks, Laura. And I think it's a great question that Adam has asked, and where I want to come in with this is, the whole concept of circularity in mining, which I think provides for huge opportunities, not only for existing mines in terms of how they continue to, extract value from tailings, but also in as far as the design of future mines. And where you can take this concept even further is in how you actually make use of rock waste, or what, from a mining perspective, what they dump on surface in addition to tailings are rock waste dumps. And from a context of a continent that's also is going to be requiring a significant amount of development, that is something that can be planned for use as input into a lot of infrastructure projects. So I think there's an opportunity where, having said before, mining as a catalyst, what is seen as waste out of mining is value into another industry. And this is where I think the concept of, clarity on what the economic development policy is provides for opportunities for creativity in terms of what certain industries can, the role that they can play, not only in terms of the value extraction of that particular sector, but how it can link up with other sectors. And this is where we can really begin to see ESG, really step up to a different level, just from a mining perspective, but also in terms of what it can contribute to the overall development of a country and a region.
I think Adam is contemplating some of those responses there. Thank you. Thank you, Mzila. The time is flying quite quickly, and I see we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, which I promised to get to. But I want to touch on something that I started right at the beginning of the conversation, and Kashani, I'll bring you in here, and that is the concept or the notion that the mining industry is becoming closer to manufacturing, for example, or shall I say by extension of that, downstream value addition. Now, I know this is something the IDC has a significant interest in supporting localized downstream value addition, perhaps mostly in the automotive or battery industries. Do you want to touch on what the IDC is doing in that regard and why you feel it is so important?
Yeah, let's start with the why. So I think Musa coined it that, if you know what you have, then you can do more. You can talk to your prospective partners. But if we stop with extraction, I don't think we'd be would be doing our job as developers of industry, right? Once you know what you have, any attractive ore body, it's going to find its way out the ground. But the more of that we can develop on the continent, the more value we would be extracting out of it. It starts to make sense when you start thinking of global value chains. So we've had a few interactions where, you know, our market, like particularly our EV market, is a small one, and you know it sways the conversation in the wrong direction. But in all cases, we're looking at developing our assets into global supply chains, not just for our market. Having said that, our stationary storage market is not insignificant. I think last year we may have been the fifth largest market in stationary storage. So yeah, those opportunities are there. So yes, indeed, we're seeing the OEMs looking upstream for security reasons or security of supply. I don't want to mention names, but you can assume it's pretty much all of them. I mean, some of them we've spoken to directly, including in mining and, of course, in processing as well. Yeah, so those are the kind of partnerships where we're trying to link, you know, to say, you know, if we have the advantage of minerals on the subcontinent, how far downstream can we extract value? Not just minerals, so to speak. So we're taking a bi-directional approach. We're trying to make the most of the market or application as well, and link it to the upstream side of things.
Thank you, Khashani, and good to hear what you're thinking about, and appreciating again that we can't do anything downstream unless we have the minerals developed and the geology encouraging exploration that converts to mines and that converts to downstream value addition. So really it is a full circle in terms of the mining industry's role to play. So Dipto, let's touch on technology again, because I don't want to forget the importance of this topic when we're talking about this. You know, we've spoken about downstream value addition now, and perhaps from your perspective, there's a critical role to play between being a connection point between a mine and the logistics that's needed by that mine and downstream value addition. Would you say that there's a fair statement in that, the important role that the technology provider has to play across that whole value chain? If you agree with that, we would love to hear your comments or thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think absolutely. I think technology, you know, at the heart of it plays a very pivotal role in kind of connecting. I mean, over the past 30 years, you know, in MTN, you know, we have believed that, you know, that everyone deserves the benefit of modern connectivity. And, you know, some of the fellow panelists that have spoken, it's not just the mine, it's the SMME, it's the ecosystem, you know, it's the communities that also get included. And that is where I think, you know, as we look to shape the next 30 years, you know, in this particular space, the role of technology across the continent, you know, is going to be a lot more profound. Obviously, there is the true north of, you know, in today's day and age where, you know, the critical resources sector are looking at kind of adopting modern technologies where, you know, the data becomes very critical, and how do you leverage artificial intelligence? How do you look at other 4IR technologies? But I think what we are seeing more and more is, you know, again, every mine and in every country, the maturity is different. But how do we look at the basic fundamentals? You know, how do we look at, you know, the basic connectivity? And this is where the potential of leveraging, you know, connecting the value chain through modern technologies like private network, because connectivity by far and large, you know, there has been a lot of limitations, what can be or cannot be implemented. And also there is a commercial implication to it, how viable it is, you know. And as the things are getting a lot more better commercialized, what we're seeing is, you know, connectivity through modern technologies like private network, you know, things like whether it's GSM technologies like 4G and 5G can really enable a lot of the things that the panelists have spoken about. And further to that, I think earlier I spoke about the convergence of IT and OT. And I think this is where we are looking at Internet of Things becoming very real and effectively, getting into a very secured environment, because, a lot of things, as we are looking at progression, we don't want on the continent, this sector to be hit with big security issues. So how does security control gets embedded from a technology perspective? And effectively, it's the convergence, that we are seeing, where we're looking at how AI algorithms, can leverage real-time data from IoT devices to basically optimize process, improve efficiency, and potentially drive a lot of innovation. So it's not only connecting the value system, it's not only connecting the minds and the ecosystem, but it's also to take the industry into the next level. Thank you.
Thanks, Aditya. Coin that phrase, they take the industry to the next level. Love that. I want to touch on one of the audience questions. I think it's so pertinent to the conversation. Adam, I think you would probably be best suited to respond to this, but I'm happy for any of the other panelists to comment if they see relevance. Adam, the question is asking, what innovative policy incentives or models have you seen globally that African countries could adopt to attract private sector investment while still ensuring that local communities and economies are the primary beneficiaries? So really understanding if there's global examples that the African industry can learn from a policy incentives or models perspective.
That's a very good question. And to be honest, it's exactly what we're looking at in the Global Investor Commission, is to look at where are there examples that you've enabled the kind of policy security, clarity in terms of the playing field in which companies are operating, that enables mining to occur, and also investors to have confidence in those companies that are then going to be doing it. I mean, one area that I have seen and I do welcome, just in relation to tailings, is the increase in translation of the global industry standard on tailings management into legislation, and investors have been particularly keen to see that following the disasters that have occurred in the sector. And that has been a massive risk for investors looking at a sector that didn't understand that risk, quite frankly, and that's investors didn't understand it. And you've now seen a global industry standard developed together with industry, with the UN, and a multi-stakeholder process and investors. And that has then formulated clarity as to the expectation that investors, banks, insurers have now got of companies. And whilst the biggest companies in the world have committed to implementing that standard, you're now seeing a long list of other companies outside of ICMM that are starting to adopt it. And so we've got about 65% by market capitalization adopting that. So it's in effect becoming a norm, and governments are starting to integrate that into legislation. And so for me, you've actually probably got a model. Okay, it's around one issue, and it's around the issue of tailings waste, but nonetheless, it's the kind of way that you've seen industry coming together with investors, coming together with the sort of governments and the UN, informed by multi-stakeholders, to try and ensure that you can address a risk. Now, the question is really about how do we ensure that we can get that capital flow, particularly into African countries. And some of the work we're doing at the moment is looking at what would it take for investors. And I also note there was a question related to sort of asset owners within country rather than just sort of external investors. But how do we join the local investors with international investors, working together with industry and governments, both in terms of those countries that are really demanding minerals, as well as those that actually have the mineral resources, in the kind of partnerships that's going to address the kind of questions that traditionally are presented as barriers in terms of risk and country insecurity, all those kind of things. How do you overcome that? And it's going to be through partnerships of those groupings. And for me, that's the sort of territory that the Global Investor Commission is now really actively exploring. We're looking at a couple of countries in particular in Africa in terms of how that can be achieved, and the kind of way that that can really lead to practical investment. But I really do feel it's going to come from partnerships. It's going to come from ensuring that there's that regulatory structure that provides security and clarity, and at the same time that there's good mechanisms for when you do hit barriers, and that you can sort of address those quite rapidly as well. So that's probably the best way I can answer that at the moment, because I still feel that we're mid-flight in identifying the good practice.
Thanks, Adam. Mzila?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I mean, I think one example that is often not quoted from a model of a partnership between what I call capital, financial capital, and social capital and community is the Royal Bafokeng Nation. And I mean, I had the privilege of working for the Bafokeng for 6 years. After a period where, with the change in legislation and with the endowment that they had on their properties, they actually had to pivot and be commercial in terms of, the manner in which those mining rights were held. And that's a very important point to bear in mind in terms of, the need for a shift in thinking in terms of communities who have assets in their hands in order to be able to play a role in this role of mineral extraction and value addition. And when you then take a further look into their model, it is then how they commercialize the assets in terms of differentiating how they were held as a community before and what the laws provided, compared to putting them in a commercial vehicle, which then provided them with certain commercial rights and allowed them to enter into contracts, which then were able to give investors and themselves security of tenure and holding into those assets. That asset was then further enhanced through a listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange to then form what was the Royal Bafokeng Platinum, which was subsequently taken up by the Bafokeng. And what you want to appreciate is, how does the value created in the platinum investments and many other investments flow through to the communities? So there is a well-structured community. There's a well-structured community structure, so to speak, for the delivery of value through a trust that links the community with the commercial assets in order to see that dividend flow and investment in community, and a separation of duty between the commercial managers who are focused on creating value and what you can call the social managers who have the fiduciary duty of taking that investment and investing it appropriately in that community. And it's something that has taken long, and there are many other similar examples of communities in pretty much similar circumstances in Canada and America, who are referred to as the First Nations, looking at other asset bases such as casinos, agriculture, who have similar structures. But I think the essence of the question for me really speaks to the need for communities to also be commercial, and to shift and to really take on and step up to this to the platform and engage with investors on equal terms.
Thanks, Mzila. Great responses on both fronts, and the notion of communities returning again as part of the conversation. There's a really interesting question from the audience. I'm not quite sure who on the panel would probably be the best to respond, but I'm going to ask it and put it out to the panel to consider. And Khashani, it would be great to hear from you on this, I think, but I'll leave it to the panel. And the question is sort of stating, with the growing demand for critical energy minerals required to enable global energy transition, are there any policy initiatives or dialogue in South Africa that consolidate the governance of these minerals from exploration to downstream industries, as we are already seeing electric vehicles on our roads that probably have traces of South African minerals in them? So I just think that's a brilliant question, maybe a bit of a tough one, Does anyone on the panel want to have a go at responding to this one?
I'll let Khashana go first.
Thanks, Mzila.
I was hoping you would go first. Well, look, the issue of policy is always a very broad consideration, always a sensitive one, and I need to be careful speaking my mind versus, somebody at IDC. But one specific example we can point to is the electric vehicle white paper that came out in December last year. The devil's in the details, which is yet to come, but it made a fairly clear intent of linking the automotive sector to the, let's call it, minerals sector. It may not be directly mining, but at least to acknowledge the content of a vehicle a little bit further upstream. So not just the component, which would typically be, whatever, a radiator or catalytic converter, but also is the mineral coming from South Africa, and has the automotive manufacturer been involved in the development of that mineral into their vehicle. So still, a sub judice, but I think that's one example where we're making that link to join the dots across the value chain.
No, thanks to Khashana. So, I mean, I wasn't aware, and I'm not aware of any policies or conversations, but I think Khashana's input is quite insightful. But I think the issue talks to traceability, and it's something that we've seen in the diamond mining industry. And with prevailing geopolitical conversations, this is becoming a critical issue of traceability. But I think it's going to go beyond that from a geopolitical perspective, but from a responsible mining perspective. We're going to see it with carbon in terms of carbon content, not only of manufactured products, but it will start with the source of the mineral or the raw materials and their carbon content. So, and at the moment, I think it's perhaps standards based, but if you look at CBAM, it is certainly bringing in the policies. And it's CBAM not only from a European perspective, but several other countries coming up with similar policies. So it is something that will have an influence on mining and mining carbon efficiency, but I think overall on the responsible inputs of extracting those minerals.
If I may, I was thinking along similar lines as Sudipta was talking about technology, that we've had a look at a blueprint of a product passport for critical minerals all the way down to batteries, etc. And I must say it's quite daunting, the expanse of it, and particularly when you think it is across multiple sectors and across multiple geographies, that you need to be able to certify and trace an element down to a manufactured product in Europe somewhere. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do to be able to extract all of that value.
A great initiative, Khashani. A lot of work to do, but I think would definitely be of value to get there eventually. Now, I'm going to hand over to Mosa, but just letting our audience know that Mzila has a hard stop on the hour, so we might lose him. I do want to continue the conversation maybe for another 10 minutes. There's so many great questions, and I think we'll extend that a few more minutes just to hear a few more responses from our audience. But Mzila, if we don't hear from you again, it's been great to have you on this webinar with us, and really appreciate the value that you've brought to the conversation. Mosa, if you would like to jump in on this question.
So thanks, Laura. I couldn't agree more with you that it is an important question. I think an even more important question is what are critical minerals?
You took that question right out of my mouth, Mosa. I'm so glad you asked it. I'm so glad you haven't got there. Hit the nail on the head. I'm so glad.
Because I think we talk about critical minerals quite loosely. And I've done quite a bit of an analysis of nations that have published critical minerals, and everybody has developed a list of. So if you look at Canada's critical minerals, the US, the UK has its own, the EU has its own, Canada and everybody else. And you can put an overlap on what are those minerals that all of them consider to be critical. Now, what has been conspicuous in its absence has been the definition of critical minerals for those that have them, and in particular in the African continent that we are talking about. So we have not yet, as the continent, taken a view on what is critical to us as producing nations. But as South Africa, I think we've taken a first step. Our minister has initiated a process of developing a classification mechanism for critical minerals, and assigned one of our very competent institution in Mintech to lead the charge in bringing all the stakeholders. I think the Minerals Council is there. I think there are some other institutions, there are some other thought leaders in that process that are beginning to then define what is critical to South Africa. Because it is only once you have defined what is critical to you would you then put in place mechanisms, the governance mechanisms, so that you can manage it properly. To the extent that we have started, I think we have an opportunity to coordinate it across the African continent. Because not doing that, so we have seen some of the countries that have just woken up and decided that we are not exporting this particular mineral from tomorrow. So, then you say, but why are you not? You know how much of it you have? You have a lot of it. Could you run out of it tomorrow after you have stopped exporting it? And so I think there needs to be a much greater thought in the continent that goes into what is the meaning of critical minerals, and what are they, and what is the basis on which we classify them as critical? What may necessarily be critical for Europe may not necessarily be critical for us in South Africa. So how then do you define that criticality and the extent to which we have a relationship with the Europeans that they deem to be critical and that we deem to be critical? Well, what is that nexus of criticality for the two nations? And could it perhaps begin to define how we relate as nations, and what are these things that we are interested in and what they mean? And I think such notions as integrated value chains may ultimately emerge out of that kind of approach. Thank you very much.
Mosa, I think you are a true mining Indaba ambassador. One of our key themes for 25 is redefining what critical minerals means for Africa. So I think we should have started on that point, but I'm so glad that you've raised it, and so glad that you feel that that Africa has the need to redefine or outline what critical minerals means from an African context. So I love that you brought that into the conversation, Mo. So really relevant, and really appreciate that you've done that. With the last 10 minutes, let me cover one or two last questions. And Sidipto, I think we've spoken a lot about community. For me, the youth is an extension of community. And as I've mentioned now on multiple occasions, I think during this session, their importance as a stakeholder with regards to the mining industry, also downstream value addition and anything associated with the mining industry, and obviously technology is one of those aspects. How does MTN approach the inclusion of community or the youth when it comes to technology adoption?
Yeah, I think that's the inclusiveness of all communities, all gender, all ages. When we are talking about modern technologies or even connectivity, is pivotal. Is pivotal. I think we will not have a lot of success, as we know, if the mine itself is very well enabled by connectivity or modern technologies are working, and then the whole ecosystem and the community around that, including youth, is lagging behind. And I think from our perspective, our observation across the different countries on the continent, this is where also is an element of policy that needs to also be enabled, because a lot of, if you look from a telecommunication perspective, a lot of, modern technologies and how connectivity can be used, with youth or communities across mines, there might be certain things that is still evolving. And those policy would then probably also help us to create that inclusiveness. But other than, the youth of mining community benefiting the technologies or getting connected through the mine itself, our idea, we have always seen this ecosystem also through the lens of segments, industry segments. Outside the mine, you have got the large enterprise, the public enterprise, and the small and medium enterprise. And youth in all the three would be playing a very important role. Different communities will be playing a different role. I think the question that still remains that we need to solve together is, how do we make the investment, for example, on a private network in a mine? How can that benefit the public network, or vice versa? And those are the things I think also will be determined by the commercialization and, as I said, the policy. So in short, I think, from an MTN perspective or from a telecommunication industries by and large perspective, the inclusion of youth, the inclusion of different segments of the industry, and the inclusion of the ecosystem, not just at the mine, but the whole environment becomes quite pivotal, and policies and commercials would be a key enabler to it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sudipto. I'm going to ask one last question from the audience. Adam, this is definitely one for you, and Kashani, I think you could feed into it from a global versus local perspective. And this particular question is asking, or saying, shall I say, we hear a lot from investors from the global north who say that they are keen to invest, but they can't seem to get their heads around the perceived risks. So Adam, maybe you want to comment on that, and feeding on from that question, are there deep enough pools of capital in Africa to respond to that need? And Kashani, I think that's where you'll come in on this question, but Adam, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think global institutional investors in the north need to seriously reflect upon the way that they're invested in the mining sector, what they understand around what is needed, and how we need to basically lean into the sector in a very different way that works with local pools of capital to really unlock the kind of investment that's going to be needed. And that really is the task of the Global Investor Commission, because quite frankly, it's so easy to find a set of reasons not to invest in parts of Africa. It's not impossible, but it's a default that a lot will have. There'll be a deep breath and it's difficult, and then there'll be a whole raft of reasons. As to whether they're fair or not is a completely different question. As to whether you can mitigate those risks is a different question. But the starting point is through a prism, and that really isn't seeking to want to go further. And that's one of the things that we've got to completely change. And I think that there's an opportunity, and there's the beginning of momentum behind the work that the Commission's doing, of saying to the whole global investor community, we need mining, we need mining done well, and we've got to take responsibility for our role in ensuring that it can achieve that objective. And that means a mining sector that really is standing behind the best operators, that is really ensuring that we're having the investments flowing into the countries where it's needed, and that you're putting in place the partnerships with local investors and governments to really sort of unlock that kind of flow that's needed. And I think that there's a way to go. The first report we've produced was really targeted at the investor community to just say, look, this is the future demand trajectory. This is the positive role mining plays. These are the challenges, so that we're being completely clear around them. And these are the levers that we've got. And on that basis, now let's work out practically what we're going to be doing. And that's why the Indaba for us is so important, because we're going to be having a series of roundtables there where we're looking and deep diving with investors as to what it is practically that needs to be in place for us to be different in the way that we look and invest, and that we can develop that kind of partnership and dynamic to go forward. And I think that there's a really tangible opportunity for us to sort of do that. But I don't want to pretend that that isn't a challenge, because it is. And a lot of it is mindset. And I think the stuff we're doing through the commission is trying to overcome that. And then it's about dialogue, partnerships, and getting on with it and getting practical, not necessarily the big international elements of this. It's actually about putting in place, right, in this country, this is the geological profile, this is what's needed, these are the opportunities, these are the challenges here, and this is the kind of discussion that we need to be getting in, really sleeves rolled up, with companies at the table, with investors, with government and other stakeholders, so that we can actually sort of ensure that there is that flow of investment coming in. So my sense is that that's the job of work that we've got to do over the coming year. And I would say that the Indaba for us is critical as an interface to have that dialogue and work through practically how we can sort of address that.
No, fantastic, Adam, and great to hear what you're doing at Indaba, and great to get your perspectives on what is needed by the global north in essence. Kashani, the local perspective on the question.
Yeah, no, that message is so much better coming from a non-local, but to add to that, I think one of the key strategies is don't walk the road alone as an investor. I've been at IDC for 3 years now. I haven't come across a transaction where we didn't have enough capital. In fact, that's our problem. In any given year, we don't deploy enough into the market. So I'm not saying we have all the capital in the continent, but in partnerships and in collaboration, I think we can walk a long way together. Quick example is Moselle. BHP wanted to go in there 3 years after the end of the civil war in Mozambique, and they didn't want to do it alone. They did not need IDC money, but they needed a partner. And recently what we've done is we've expanded our continental mandate, where we can invest anywhere across the country, subject to risk metrics, but continent. We've got a risk metrics, but no country is excluded, right? And you don't have to have South African or direct South African interest. So we can invest in wherever, DRC with no South African party involved. So yeah, there's many ways of de-risking investment.
Thank you, Kashani. And I think an important notion that we didn't really touch on much is the notion of partnerships and how those can really be utilized effectively to unlock our critical minerals wealth. And Adam, thank you for touching on the role that our global investors need to play and really get their hands dirty in understanding Africa and doing business in Africa. I think just to close, I'd like to offer Mosa and Sidipto a 1-minute closing remark just on the conversation at large. Any last thoughts you'd like to add to the conversation before we conclude for today's webinar? Mosa, to you first.
All right, just really want to thank you for great facilitation of the session, for having us on this important topic, and I certainly hope that it will take shape as we move forward. But importantly for us, and you would have seen I posted there, that at the CGS we have a mantra that geology is the fulcrum for human development. And I think I have made that case very well today. Thank you very much.
You did indeed, Mosa. Thank you so much. Sudipto, any last closing remarks from your end?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if my comment, I can say that we made the fulcrum, but to use Musa's point, starting with geology all the way to ESG, what we covered today is fascinating. And I think, what we need to believe in is, once we all understand what critical resources is, as Musa made the point, and I'm glad to hear there's a lot of discussions around that. However, I think mining overall, I think how do we retain, how do we reap the most benefit, on the continent? And I truly believe that technology as a key enabler to solve a lot of those issues would be one of the key answers. So we hope that the transformation of this industry through technology, happens at a much more rapid pace. The investments and the commercialization of that then supports to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Sudipto. We have time. Adam, a closing remark from yourself?
I think the other point that we really need to work with is the value chain and really drawing that in. And it's great to have a representative of that on the call. But I think they've got to be partners in sharing risk and in driving the kind of demand that they can align. And obviously, when you're a globalized investor, you don't just invest in the mining sector, you invest in all the industries that demand what comes from mining. So I think alignment, making those connectivities, having that consistency of expectation, and then really getting down, working at the national level on how we can unlock the investment that's needed to the standards that I think everybody could align around. And I think the opportunity then is a positive one. And also one, and I note the points around youth, that we really need to work ways that we can bring younger people into this industry, be that at the mine site, be that in opportunities around it, be that into the geology departments around the world. There's far too many grey-haired people, often men, and I think there's real opportunities to see a new generation coming through and hopefully becoming the chief executives of the companies as well.
Oh, absolutely, Adam. Thank you for weighing in on that youth aspect, such a critical component of the conversation. Khashani, I'll hand over to you to close out from the panel on last thoughts.
Yeah, for me, it's really about bringing the industrialization or processing conversation to the mining table. Very happy that you invited us to speak on that. And I must say, I almost bullied my way into this conversation because my mining colleagues were ready to come and speak. And I was like, no, the mining is sorted. We need to, move the conversation downstream a little bit. So it would be great to have that as a big feature in any mining roundtable.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how you want to wrap up here, but there's a lot of questions that I would like to respond to in writing. So I don't know if we'll still have access to these questions just to
Don't worry, Mining Weekly will ensure you have an opportunity to respond to all the questions. There are so very, very many. Thank you so much for a fascinating conversation between all my panelists. There definite takeaways for me. Geology. Even before exploration, we need to know what our geology is and where our geology is. So Mosa, thank you for reiterating the importance of that. The investment conversation and what is needed, where we are and what is the way forward. Khashani, downstream and the way that mining is becoming so much closer to that sector and how important it is to be aligned. Sudipto, technology and the role that this will play in ensuring Africa unlocks its true critical minerals potential. And on top of all of that, the importance of community, the importance of the youth. So a well-rounded conversation touching on all the crucial aspects that are needed to really unlock Africa's true critical minerals potential. This is just one of the conversations that we'll be having at Mining Indaba in much more detail. So please do join me and all our panelists that I'm sure will be there and come and be part of more of these conversations in February next year. And with that, let me close out and I will hand back to Shannon. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thanks so much, Laura. That brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our facilitator, Laura Nicholson, for enabling an engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelists, Mzila Mthenjane from the Minerals Council South Africa, Sudipto Moitra from MTN Business, Mosa Mabuza from Council for Geoscience, Khashani Mohale from the IDC, and Adam Matthews from the Church of England Pensions Board for their insights. As Laura mentioned, we will be getting all the questions to our panelists, and some of them might be able to respond to you. Thank you to our partner Investing in African Mining Indaba, and our sponsors, Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, MTN Business, the Council for Geoscience, the Industrial Development Corporation, Stratus, and South African Airways for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on critical minerals. We hope you found this event engaging and informative. We really appreciate your participation. This year's webinars have been fantastic, and we're excited for even more in the coming year. Our first session in 2025, scheduled for the 29th of January, will spotlight South Africa's energy outlook for the year, with a focus on accelerating investment in South Africa's transmission network. You'll find the registration link in the chat. We've also shared the link to register for Investing in African Mining Indaba, taking place in Cape Town from 3 to 6 February 2025. Register now and connect with investors at Mining Indaba 2025, the ultimate networking, deal-making, and discussion forum for the industry's most recent trends and challenges. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course, and if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you everyone for your time, and goodbye.